Hello, everybody, and welcome to a podcast, a Hypnotic Authenticity podcast. I'm going to talk today about a subject that I just found was absolutely fantastic. This is a subject that was provoked by a client, in actual fact, and it grew into such a chewy conversation that I thought it was worthwhile to use it as the subject matter for a longer discussion here. So the question from the client actually came as a response to one of the previous recordings that I'd made on the subject of awakening. So you might, if you haven't listened to that podcast, you might want to listen to that one or watch that one. But as a sort of a very brief précis into the conclusions that I came to there, whilst I won't go through the kind of the intricacies of everything, if you can find yourself at a position of being awakened, having a sense of self-awareness, emancipation, if you wish to go so far. And I know that that's a really, really grand label. So please forgive me for the grand label, but I don't know how else to express it. If you can bring yourself to that point through a series of self-inquiry events, let's say, you get to benefit from understanding your place in the world, but you get to also understand the place of the world. And for me, at least, when this occurs, not that I'm saying that I have reached the point of full emancipation, absolutely not. In fact, I think this is a journey which continues throughout your existence. I don't think it is a one-stop shop at all. But from what I've gone through so far, what happens is that your ego reduces because you no longer feel as though you are pushing against the system, and instead you are relating to the system. In the Awakening podcast, I talk quite a bit about the difference between objectifying your experience, basically there being a difference between you and everything else and other, the 10,000 things, and relating, where you come to see yourself as being part of the mesh of the interplay of everything, the universe. And so there is an element, once you start to really, really delve inside of yourself, as to how interconnected you are with everything. And this is a beautiful, freeing experience because suddenly you don't need to push so hard. Suddenly you don't need to prove yourself. Suddenly you have a far greater respect for your fellow man and for everything else which is in the universe, because everything is playing with everything else. There is a very subtle interplay in this mesh, in the dance of the flow of event after event after event of everything, whatever you want to call everything. So, so that's kind of what I talked about in the previous recording that I made about awakening. But the end conclusion is, well, we are part of this very large everything, and our place within that is very, very small. And so the question from the client was, well, look, if I'm, and to paraphrase, if I'm chasing enlightenment, which I know is already a minuscule part of the story, because depending upon your perspective, you are rediscovering what you always were, and you were actually always enlightened. It's just that there was a veil over your perception as to what was there beneath. But anyway, let's not go down that subject now. Her question was, so imagine that I do find myself in this position of beautiful, joyous, bliss-like emancipation. My self-awareness and my place in the universe is understood. Well, what's the point? Because she interpreted that to mean, well, if my place in the world is kind of preordained and everything is kind of rubbing against everything else and impacting everything else, and I'm this tiny speck of minuscule sand in the vast, vast expanse of everything that is expanding, well, then my agency, my personal power, is next to nothing. So how on earth do you square the idea of personal power and choice versus the fact that the universe is doing everything it's doing and I'm so tiny and so everything is inevitable? And so that was the question that she posed. It's like, so is this just all kind of pointless? When I reach that point of illumination, does that mean that my life is inevitable? Does it mean that it is completely predictable? That I have no power? That I'm just running off down a different rail? Before I didn't know who I was and I was running on my rails, but afterwards I understand who I am and I'm still subject to the laws of the universe, okay? And so the funny thing was, when she explained that to me, it made me think of a Zen cone, which I had come across a while ago. And so in a little while, we're going to talk about this Zen cone, and I'm going to deconstruct a Zen cone. Imagine that. Not that I'm a Zen master, okay, but it is something that I thought about quite a lot. There are certain of these cones that are really really fascinating. If you don't know what a Zen cone is, let me actually no. Let's stick with what I was talking about, and then we'll go on to the Zen cone afterwards. Okay. So her question in a nutshell was: if I'm going to reach emancipation, is everything going to be pointless? Because what I'm doing is I am understanding my place in the world, and therefore my life kind of becomes inevitable, because the world is so much larger than me and everything is going to be interplaying with everything else. And some of you might be thinking at this point, but what about the butterfly that flaps its wings in Tokyo and has an impact in Utah or Proxima B, which is a good. If you're thinking that, that's fantastic. So I think she was missing a big point. So I gave her my understanding of what I thought was missing from that conclusion. And in a nutshell, what I think was missing was that pre-enlightenment, pre-understanding, pre-awakening, pre-lifting the veil on the stories which are permeating your sense of reality. There is so much noise, so much influence, so much stuff out there which is moving you, swaying your very perception. The kind of the core inside of you is weak because you don't have that sense of self understanding. So it's like the roots of the tree are not well founded yet. And so if you don't understand and see through that and don't have your understanding of yourself, well, then you don't know where you want to go because you haven't yet worked out where you currently are. I don't know if that makes sense. So the point is, post revelation, emancipation, whatever you want to call it, once you understand yourself, you settle yourself, you find a sense of strength inside of you and peace inside of you and acceptance, and serenity is a great word. Well, that is the moment when you can start to seek out your own internal compass. You can start to understand your true core, your true core values, needs, motivations, the moments when you're in flow, the moments when you are in bliss, right? The moments that feel right for you and the moments that feel wrong. Understanding that is all part of this historical creation of stories from events that have unfurled in your life and all that kind of stuff. But nonetheless, that certain things feel great, certain things don't. And that once you can Understand what of that is coming from within you, what of that is coming from outside, and you can start to make discrete judgments based upon so much more information. Well, then for me, what happens is you are finally permitting yourself the ability to discover what I call, or what some people call, your golden path. Okay, the reason for your place in the world, your what you were here always to do, the reason for your place, what it is that maybe destiny brought you towards. I don't know, your heart's desire, your soul's desire, all that stuff, that beauty, that joy, that love is the other side of awakening, because what's happening there is you are seeing the influences from outside of you for what they are. You are seeing the smoke and mirrors of your mindset for what it is, and you are attempting, to what extent it might be possible, to delve beneath that and find your truth. Yeah. And so suddenly you're able to discover that sense of you. So that's what I explained to her. Okay. Now, this also makes me come up because I use that word bliss. I remember reading something by Eckhart Tolle. Tolle, I'm not sure how to pronounce his surname, where he said, be very, very careful if you do reach this point of emancipation, of freedom, of awakening, of self-awareness, because it's dangerously, perilously easy at that point to just float around in a blissed out state, to sit yourself down on a park bench, lay down with your head staring up at the sky, the sun, the stars, with this incredible smile on your face, and do absolutely nothing. Very careful of that, because it's tempting, right? It's very easy. It's like this awestruck sensation. And my response to that is it's the heart. Okay. I can only talk about my personal experience. Okay. So unfortunately, I don't know if this is universally applicable, but for me, that moment of beginning to understand what it is that I am and what is everything else, and how that all kind of fits together, and the quietening of the mind, and the discovery of self-hypnosis, and the ability to evaluate and calibrate experience. When that skill grows, when your serenity returns, when you feel like you've come home, your heart doesn't yearn for inaction. Okay, at least for me. I think your heart yearns to express, to love, if you want to follow a cliche. And the way to love the universe, the way to love everything beyond you, the way to give a gift back to the things that you don't understand, is by following your dream, goal, motivation, golden path, flow moments, satori moments. It's by understanding what it feels like, at least, that you were meant to do. The things that you cannot not do. The things that make you fill with the zest of life. And when you have that sense of self-awareness, that information flow is stronger, it's more durable, it's more impressive, let's say, internally as an experience. And so the calling from the heart to follow that golden path is a yearning, an absolute yearning. And so for me, although it's beautiful to have those blissed out moments where you stare at the stars and go, it's fantastic to remind yourself how awe-inspiring everything is. There is an energy inside of me, I'm not thinking about making my heart beat. It beats on itself. It's like this phrase, you breathe and the earth breathes you, the universe breathes you, and you come along for the ride. You have, to me, a certain obligation when you reach that point to fulfill to the best manner that you can, given what you know and what you don't know, your expression of yourself. Or at least that's my story, right? So for me, in actual fact, even though I understand post awakening, or whatever grandiose term you want to use, that my power is relatively limited, that the world is a massive place, and that I'm going to get bombarded by everything in the world, I am then free to fulfill perhaps the destiny that was always there, but that before I was pushing against, and now I am embracing with all my heart. Maybe that makes more sense as a way of explaining it. Let's talk about this Zen cone, because this is fantastic. I find this such a juicy way of chewing on the ambiguities of life, I think is the best way to describe it. I don't know if you know what a Zen cone is, so let me give you a brief naive explanation of what a Zen cone is. Okay, and I will say again, I have not followed the Zen way of life. I have not been to the top of a mountain and sat there staring against a wall for years and years and years. I have not done that, but I have read the books, and I do love self-inquiry. Okay, so Zen cones were presented as um, conundrums that cannot be solved through intellectualization. You come to a greater understanding of a Zen cone by letting go of your thought process, because it's kind of an unsolvable conundrum from a mental capacity perspective, and letting it percolate into your body and seeing what comes up. And apparently you can dive into these things for years, a single one, before you come out with your aha moment. Okay, so there are many of these Zen codes. That's the intention of them, is to bring around a sort of a sense of one layer of the onion being peeled away effectively. Okay, so let me give you this particular example. So it's imagine a Zen master on the top of a beautiful mountain teaching his students whatever it is that he's teaching. Very old, wise Zen master. And he's in, let's call it a classroom, and he's talking with the students. And at the back of the room, every day, there's an old man who is not one of the students, who just seems to participate in the lessons. And at the end of the lesson, the students file out one by one, and the old guy disappears. But one day, of course, the students file out, but the old guy hangs around. So there's just him and the Zen master in the room. And for the first time, there is this presential opportunity between the two of them. So the Zen master kind of very potently almost commands the old man, so present yourself. Who are you? What are you doing here? And the old man explains that he used to be the Zen master. He used to be the other guy. He used to teach students in a room just like this, maybe the same room. And that one day, whilst he was teaching, one of his students asked him, if an individual becomes enlightened, becomes self-aware, does that mean that the law of cause and effect no longer applies? That was the question. Let me just go through the whole story and then I'll deconstruct it. So the old man, when he was the Zen master, replied, no, once you are enlightened, once you understand, then the law of cause and effect no longer applies. At which point, kind of spontaneously, he is transformed into a fox and he is consigned, condemned for the next 50 lifetimes to live his existence as a fox. The implication obviously being that he said the wrong response. And so this fox is now roaming outside on the top of the mountain. And this old man is kind of the spirit of the old man, or the spirit of the fox, who is coming every day to the lesson of the current Zen master to try to understand what it was that he didn't understand. And so he asks, he kind of, prostrates himself at the feet of the Zen master. Is there anything that you can tell me to explain what it is that I didn't pick up on? Let me just give you a kind of a background to what I understand as being that question. Okay, so once you're enlightened, does that mean that the law of cause and effect no longer applies? From my understanding, my story, I think the context of that question, if you put yourself in the position of those people at that time, I think the crux of the question was based around their belief of karma. So karma is effectively, whatever it is that you are not integrating in your current understanding of yourself will be presented to yourself as a challenge, as an event, as some opportunity to delve into that part of yourself so that you can understand that. Once that's been resolved, once it's been integrated, you pass on. And so the idea of these kind of karmic rebirths is so that you can experience a life from a different perspective, so that you can come to a deeper understanding of what it is to be you. And this process continues life after life after life until you reach the point of self-understanding. Okay, so for me, his question was, once you've reached that place of enlightenment, of self-understanding, well, does that mean that all of that no longer needs to exist, right? And so the old man, as the Zen master, he thought he was being correct in saying, okay, so once you've reached that point of self-understanding, the laws of cause and effect need not apply, effectively don't apply, because you've reached that point. That's at least how I was understanding with the question, okay? And so he's there at the feet of the Zen master saying, please, please tell me, what is it that I'm missing? What is it that I just didn't understand? Can you give me what they call a turning word? Something to unravel this knot that I'm tied to in my mind. And so the Zen master replies, when you become emancipated, when you become self-aware, a self-aware individual does not evade the laws of cause and effect. So he answered the question in a very subtly different way. At which point the old man has this, look of ecstatic relief, like he's just thrown a bag of bricks off his back. Understands, and I'll let you chew on the understanding for a few minutes whilst I blather on. and is basically incredibly grateful to the Zen master. He says, "Look, now I get it. Now I understand it. The fox is dead. The fox no longer needs to exist, in other words. Please will you perform a funeral for the fox so that I can be released?" And so the Zen master agrees. Old man disappears. The Zen master explains to his students that that evening they're going to go out, they're going to find the fox, and indeed they find the fox, lifeless. They bring it back, they perform a cremation ceremony. The students are very confused because, they don't know why they were doing this. And so the Zen master explains the story to the students. To which, of course, because history kind of turns and repeats itself, to which one of the students asks the Zen master a question. And this is the conundrum. So the question that he asks is, okay, so what if the old man, when he was the Zen master, when he was answering the student, well, what if he'd answered, when an individual becomes enlightened, he does not evade the laws of cause and effect? What if in any one or every one of those 50 lifetimes as a fox, he responded with that? At which point the Zen master asks the student to come up. The student comes up and slaps the Zen master in the face and laughs. Okay. So what's going on there? And I think this is so crucial to our understanding of ourselves. That's why I bring it up. Okay. Because what happens is you go down this intellectual rabbit warren. Okay. So what if? So let's take a step back. So what is the difference with the enlightened one does not evade the laws of cause and effect? So what we're saying there is what I was referring to beforehand, that the universe, the everything, is made up of the 10,000 things, okay? The myriad of things. All the other people in this world, all the other animals, the climate, the environment, the solar system, the stars beyond, the black matter, the other planets, the gravitational flows, the evolving of time, the vast expanding everything is interplaying amongst itself. Cause and effect, action and reaction is constantly occurring between every single one of those things, and yet somehow the entirety finds a balance, a harmony. And we, as an individual trying to understand ourselves inside of that, are a infinitesimally small component part of it. And so the law of everything, the law of all of that action, is vastly larger than us. And so our potential for power is minuscule. We do not evade the fact that everything else is doing what everything does. So we do not evade the law of cause and effect. But we are a minuscule, infinitesimally small part of a system which is in harmony. And we know from systems theory, we know from an understanding of anything which is in balance, that if one, no matter how small part, adjusts, everything else very subtly shifts in order to compensate. And you can look at this as a family system, as a work system, as an environmental system, as a conceptual system. Everything very, very subtly adjusts if one component part is moved. Okay. So the old man obviously understood. Oh, okay. So I am not omnipotent. I am still a tiny, tiny part of everything, even if I reach the point of complete self-awareness, whatever that may mean, even if that's potentially possible. But that I need not continue down that calm approach because I've kind of reached that point of understanding, maybe, I don't know. As I say, personally, for me, that journey doesn't really continue. Okay, so the conundrum is, so what if he had answered correctly? Surely, if he answered correctly, he would no longer need to be a fox. He would, by the act of having changed his response, have produced a different effect. And so he does have power in the cause-effect conundrum. Yeah, that's what the mental rabbit warren is wanting you to dive down. For me, the position of realization of that is that question was never ever valid. That in order to conceptualize that what if, you as the thinker would have to be outside of the system, looking on it as if it were a thing that you could observe like an experiment without affecting the experiment. Whereas in reality, the Zen master was inside his system, inside everything's system. And so the idea to start with that at the time he might have come up with a different conclusion is utterly nonsensical, because he comes up with the conclusion which is correct to him at the moment in time that he is asked the question, based around his understanding at that time. So there was never the possibility of responding contrary to that. So what happens, at least to me, is that we go through a process of lifting veil upon veil upon veil of self-awareness, self-understanding, until we lift the stories, or some of the stories, that upon which we hang our definition of reality. We come to see ourself from a position of ambiguity. We start to become comfortable with unknowing, with not needing to be correct, with conflicted perspectives that might both be correct, with yin and yang, effectively, with light and shade. With all things, we start to become comfortable with all things, even the things that we wish weren't there in our meaning-making machine of what is right and wrong. That the entirety of that is a massive series of labels based around our stories and so on and so on and so on. And so when you reach that, then you can understand that that what if question was never possible. It was nonsensical. And so you don't need for the Zen master to get tripped up, which is the reason why the student then, when the Zen master says, come up here and I'll explain this to you very quietly to yourself, the student comes up and slaps him on the face. Because between the two of them, they understand that what they presented was an absurdity. And everybody at that point can get drunk on life, drunk on the reality of their minuscule existence. Yeah. So to go back from that, okay, what is the meaning of that? What is the use of that when it comes to the question that was presented originally? Okay, so if I reach my point of enlightenment, does that mean that suddenly my life is dull? predictable, inevitable? Am I just following out something's destiny? And therefore, what's the point of it all? Okay. So for me, what is going on at that point, by a sense of self-discovery, you are finally freeing yourself to follow your destiny, your golden path, your inevitability, your beauty. You are finally free to express your truth, to discover your truth, and to start to act upon your truth. Now, the action may, with the benefit of hindsight from a future date, look like a series of inevitabilities. It is always obvious in hindsight to see how you reached today. But at the juncture of each of those events along the journey, starting with this present moment and going forwards, it's all an adventure because we do not have the benefit of hindsight in the current moment. We're doing what feels right. And so what is happening is, perhaps from some external observer's perspective, occurring as if it were written. But from our personal perspective, we have a enlightenment followed by an enlightenment followed by an enlightenment, a never-ending adventure of discovery as to the kernel of ourselves inside the story, inside the story, inside the story, and so on ad infinitum. And that is joyous. There's nothing dull or predictable or pointless or inevitable about that. Even if from some things' perspective it was preordained, you can discover a sense of faith from this. So does that make sense? What I'm saying is, when you reach that point of self-understanding, you are freeing yourself. You're finding the serenity, the absolute peace inside of yourself that allows you, that permits you to discover that kernel, that essence of you. Maybe you want to call it your soul, I don't know. By identifying your moments of flow, your Satori moments when you just feel alive, that you just feel on track, that allow you to discover your internal rhythm, your internal compass, your internal motivations, your core truths and values, the direction that is most meaningful to you. And so that is an extraordinary opportunity. Ironically, it is an ego trip, okay? So the process of enlightenment, you kind of reduce your ego. You keep on reducing your ego. You kind of keep on realizing that what you thought was you isn't you at all. And you strip that away, and it feels like the ego is getting smaller and smaller. And you understand the vastness of everything else. And that seems to grow and grow and grow. And your place in the harmony of all that gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But in the ultimate paradox, by reaching this stage of self-discovery and then continuing to the next stage of self-discovery and continuing down that journey of understanding, that is actually a massive ego trip. It's an enormous opportunity for ego expansion, even though the system is getting massive and your ego in itself might, if you want to conceptualize it, might be getting smaller. Yeah. So the potential for living inside your technicolor extravaganza increases. It's just that it does it in the full knowledge that there is so much out there which is beyond, that no matter how hard you try, this brain is never going to be able to comprehend the entirety of the expanding everything. And that's not your job, and that finally it turns out your job is to fulfill what it is to be you. And from there comes passion, comes drive, comes motivation, comes joy. In the face of the fullness of everything, you free yourself to this kind of ability to be whatever it is that you are. You, huh, you find your authenticity. You exhibit your all, your essence, your truth. And because you understand the interplay of everything, there's no need to prove that. There's no need to sell that. There's no need to do so in order to get. There's no need to persuade anything. There's no need to get a reaction. You are simply being your truth, partly for yourself and partly because it is what is demanded of the everything. Oh, how metaphysical is that? That's a massive adventure. It's a massive, joyous experience. And from here comes love. From here comes joy. Even if it turns out that looking back, you can see that there was a certain element of destiny to it. What you're doing is freeing yourself to follow your nature, to play your part, to play the part that you were born to play, to see this existence as a speck in the vast expanse of whether you want to call it time or a series of events or whatever, because even time is complicated to understand when you start to see this from beyond our presential experience on this planet. This is such a tiny speck in the vastness of everything anyway. And so what is coming through this sense of self-awareness is an ability to bathe your everything in a rainbow of love, in a massive expression of kindness to all. That everything is what it is, that it always was, that all the time that you were pushing against the system, there was a desperation for truth, perhaps. There was a reason, a motivation behind it that was based around your understanding, your veil of the moment. But that today you can look on that and you can see what it was for what it was. Even if, from today's perspective, maybe that feels like a mistake. I'm sorry. I didn't know better. Please, everything, forgive me. I tried my best. I'm still trying my best. And today, I am showering you, whatever you is, you, with love. Everything. And I don't know, we can talk about this idea of vibrational frequencies and all that kind of stuff. I'm not very metaphysical, even though I've just spent this, however long it is, talking about something beautiful. And I recognize I'm still doing it from an intellectualizing point of view, but I have to do this in order to kind of express my words. But when I say this, the metaphor does fit, that I feel in a higher vibrational state of flow. And to go back to the heart yearns for you to follow that truth, that golden path, and to take actions in the full knowledge that perhaps what you think is true is still another veil, that there might be more behind, but that your destiny in each event is to be yourself, It's to demonstrate that truth and to learn from that, to introspect, to be stoic, maybe, to question, and in so doing, free yourself. I don't know. I hope that's inspirational. I hope it's maybe a little bit illuminating. Maybe it allows you to question more things. If you haven't listened to the previous podcast or around awakening, maybe go and check that one out. And even if you have, go and have a look at the others. So there's quite a few podcast type recordings coming out, but of course I have many YouTube videos on a whole variety of subjects, some of which are sort of existential like this, some of which are much more practical. They're just tools that you can put in your toolbox, in your repertoire, to use to help yourself navigate your emotions when things get swung one way or the other. And I encourage you to go and check it all out. So thank you very much for listening. And I know sometimes people tell me that my voice is a little bit hypnotic. So if you drift off from time to time and then you come back and your attention ebbs and flows, don't worry about it. Okay, because it turns out that most of the time when you're paying attention, that's the point when you learn the least. And when you are not paying rigid attention and instead are allowing your system to perceive and to percolate, actually, that's when you create knowledge. Anyway, that's another subject altogether. All right, thank you very much for watching. Take care and tune in next time. Cheers.